Hey girls.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you for asking. What have you ladies been up to?
Well, we went to a rainforest.
You went to a rainforest, and what did you do in the rainforest?
We walked on hanging bridges, we saw a ton of poison dart frogs, and we went to a waterfall.
How cool. What was the coolest part about that?
Probably the hanging bridges.
The hanging bridges. They were super high though, weren't they?
Well, I'm glad it's called a rainforest because we got poured on.
We got rained on really bad. We did, and we had to run. We had to make a run for it to get out of that rainforest, didn't we?
Then I sat in a whole bunch of ants.
You sat in a whole bunch of ants. That was not fun.
Nope.
But you were brave, and you still made a run for it while your legs were burning up with ant bites, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else have you girls been up to?
Well, we got some new art supplies and we have been doing cards for Easter.
Cool.
Well, that brings us into the question of the day.
The question of the day is, what is Easter?
What is Easter? Well, what do you think Easter is? I know we have a whole week off of school.
Isn't it all about the bunnies and candy?
I really like the bunnies and candy, personally. I love some good candy. What's your favorite candy?
Airheads.
Airheads. What about you?
Yeah, we're going to have to follow up on that question.
There's too many to choose from, right? We really like candy in our house. But the question of the day is, what is Easter? We know that it's not really all about the bunnies and the candy and the baskets, even though that's fun. What is Easter all about?
The day that Jesus died for sins and he rose from the dead.
That's exactly right. Easter is the time of the year that we celebrate Jesus' death, his burial, and his resurrection, where he overcame the grave. You're exactly right. Good job. Okay, so we know that Easter is not about the candy and the bunnies, even though we all like candy and we have fun hunting for Easter eggs. It is about, what had you told us earlier that Easter was all about?
Jesus dying on the cross and raising from the dead 3 days later.
That's right. It is about Jesus dying on the cross. He died on the cross on a Friday, and then 3 days later, he rose from the dead. And so we celebrate that at Easter. And there's so much information in the Bible about the week before, leading up to his death, and also about after he rose from the dead, right? Where he's walking around, he's ministering, and he's teaching people after he had died and resurrected here on earth. That's crazy, but that's a whole nother podcast episode, right?
I have a good idea. Why don't we talk about the last week of Jesus' life?
Great idea. We know that on Sunday, Jesus came into Jerusalem. We know that because we can find it in the Bible. So I would encourage you at home, if you're listening, to find where Jerusalem is related to where you live. It's far from us, huh? Super far. So Jesus enters Jerusalem, and we call that day
Palm Sunday.
Palm Sunday. Why is it called Palm Sunday, Grace?
Because they kept on putting they got palm leaves and put them on the ground, and they and started yelling, Hosanna, Hosanna, and it said, and Jesus came there on a donkey. And it says in Matthew 21:5, it says, behold, your king comes to you. He is humble and riding on a donkey.
That's right. And that is to fulfill some Old Testament prophecies about how the king would enter Jerusalem. I like to imagine this scene with everybody waving the palm branches. And earlier you had mentioned they didn't just throw palm branches. What else did they throw?
They threw their clothes. They threw everything they had.
That's right. So Jesus comes in to Jerusalem. He's coming to celebrate the Passover meal. The Passover meal was a big celebration, and people still celebrate it today. It is when people celebrate God delivering the nation of Israel out of slavery from Egypt and the death angel passing over the homes. It's a huge celebration. So Jesus was going to that celebration, and he's welcome into Jerusalem as king. Why do you think people were cheering for him coming into Jerusalem as king?
Because he is Jesus.
Because he's Jesus. And what had they seen him doing through his whole life?
Healing people, raising them from the dead. Isn't that amazing?
That is so amazing. They had seen Jesus healing people, raising some from the dead,
Doing miracles,
feeding thousands of people. So they were excited that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, which is interesting. What happened from Sunday when he came into Jerusalem until Friday when he's killed. What could have possibly happened?
Hey! Joke break!
This is the part when we say the joke. So, what's the joke?
The joke is, what did the beast say to his friend when they won the soccer tournament?
I don't know.
Can I have a high five?
Good, that's a good one.
Again. Ready, go. Ready, actually hit it. Go, go.
So we wonder what happened from the day Jesus came in and everyone cheered for him and welcomed him as king to Friday when he died. We know Jesus went into the temple. Do you know why?
Yes, there were these people that were selling animals and things for a lot of money to people who don't have a lot of things. And Jesus got really angry and he started just tipping over tables over and over.
Right, that is called Jesus cleansing the temple. The religious leaders were trying to sell animals for sacrifices, and they were doing it in a way that poor people had a really hard time making a sacrifice to get close to God. And that made Jesus angry, right? So he cleansed the temple, and then he spoke some things like, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees." Do you know what woe to you means?
Oh, wow, that's so cool.
It's not, whoa, that's so cool. It's like, woe on you, bad for you, scribes and Pharisees. Whoa, that's cool. It was a different type of woe. It's spelled differently. It means woe. It's like a pronouncement of judgment. Like bad things are coming to you guys because you're rejecting Jesus as king. So we know he does that. He does a lot of different teaching. He gives the Olivet Discourse. There's a big record of what Jesus does those last few days. He curses a fig tree, and he cleanses the temple. On Wednesday, there's not a lot recorded about what's happening. We do know that Judas had already made arrangements to betray Jesus.
His disciple named Judas decided to betray him. He made a plan with the religious leaders to kill Jesus. It seemed that he liked money more than, well, Jesus.
Right. So Judas betrayed Jesus. He made a plan with the religious leaders to betray Jesus. Then on Thursday, they have the Last Supper, which we call it the Last Supper now. Then it was just a supper that they did to celebrate the Passover. Do you remember any cool things that happened at that last dinner, McCall?
I know that Jesus took off his shirt and started washing people's feet.
He washed his disciples' feet, which was something that a slave would usually do in that time. He was serving them. He also got bread and he broke it with his disciples.
And he said, "This is my body." Then he got some wine and he said, "This represents my blood."
You're right. That is what we now call the Lord's Supper. And so he was preparing his disciples that he was about to leave them, that his body was going to be literally broken for them, and his blood was about to be poured out for them. That was his last supper with them.
That brings us to the most important part.
Which is what?
Jesus dying on the cross.
Jesus dying on the cross. So that Friday, Jesus was tried and then he was put to death on a cross. It was a horrific death.
Isn't he God? Like, couldn't he have jumped off the cross or like snapped and everybody dropped dead?
Absolutely. He could have jumped off the cross. He could have snapped and ended the whole world right then, but he didn't. He was obedient to the Father, even unto death. And he did that thinking of the prize which was before him, which is us, to bring us into God's family, because there's no way we could have made it on our own. So he decided and he chose to obediently die for me and for you and for our sins so that we could come into relationship with God.
That'd be a really sad ending if that was actually the ending.
You're right. 3 days later, he rose from the dead.
You jumped right to the best part. So Jesus died. Everyone was sad. A few days later, some women came to the tomb and they saw that the rock, the stone that was covering the tomb, was not there. And they were crying and they were scared. And then they saw an angel. And the angel asked them, "Why are they crying? Jesus has risen." They couldn't believe it. And so they ran and they encountered Jesus himself. And he told them, "It's me. I've risen from the dead."
I mean, they probably thought somebody stole his body.
They probably thought someone had stolen his body. So the death of Christ is obviously very important, but the resurrection of Jesus is super important. Right here, would you read this for us, Grace? 1 Corinthians 15, verse 14.
I'd love to read it. It says here, and if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and our faith is in vain.
That's right. If we do not believe in the resurrection of Christ, there is no purpose of us having any faith, because Christ's resurrection means that one day we will also beat death and we will live forever eternally with God. So that is the resurrection. We have lots of stories of what happened after Jesus rose from the dead when he was still on earth walking around. There's one about Thomas. We often call him Doubting Thomas, because what happened with him?
Well, Doubting Thomas didn't believe that Jesus was alive, and he said, I will not believe until I put my hand in the spot of his wound, and I put my finger through the hole in his hand.
Right. So he was an eyewitness to Jesus walking around, and there were hundreds of people who saw and interacted and ate with Jesus after he had risen from the dead, before he went up to heaven. That is incredible. That's what Easter is all about. It's not just about the bunnies, even though we love a chocolate bunny, and the Easter egg hunts and the candy and spending time with family, which is also great.
Why is that story important to us today?
Girl, that is the gospel story that Jesus came to earth. He lived a perfect life, and he died, and he rose again to pay the price for our sins so that we can be with God forever.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's amazing.
Look, that was the end of the show, but thank you for joining us while we learn about the true meaning of Easter.